Hi, I'm Josh, and on this episode, we're taking a closer look at capturing the human experience through the lenses of three incredible documentary photographers. Their work ranges from American politics and resistance, the raw and gritty lives of grassroots people in Jamaica and the US, and taking a humanitarian approach to documenting indigenous cultures in over 100 countries. Let's see what drives them to create their passionate work this week on Make It. Recently, I was in New York City and I had a chance to sit down with documentary photographer Nina Berman. Her wide-ranging work looks at American politics, militarism, post-violence trauma, and resistance. Let's check out that interview. Hi, Nina.
Hi.
How are you doing?
Good, how are you?
Welcome to Make It. Really glad to have you on the show.
Thanks so much.
You're a photojournalist. You do a lot of really awesome work, but why don't you tell me and everybody else at home like what it is that you do? What's your style and approach?
I work on longer-term projects, so sometimes they can take 8 months, sometimes 8 years. Usually I'm trying to investigate something that has political significance, most often in the United States, but I've worked in other countries as well.
Let's take a look at some of your images, because I think that some of these things, some of your photos that you've taken, the images that you've created are really interesting. And this first photo that you have, that you shared with us is one, I remember when we talked about this before, that was just really impressed with you and your approach and your style, and I'd love if you could tell me the story of this photo again.
Sure, so this picture was taken in 2002. It was the first anniversary of the September 11th attacks, and it was taken in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, which is where the fourth plane went down. And it was a memorial event, then President Bush was there, so, I mean, you can't tell any of these things from the picture, which is kind of part of the point. So I was there photographing on assignment, and I did all the basic kind of conventional type photojournalism pictures. But then I also started to notice things about how the press was operating and my own feelings, and that you know, all of a sudden the cameramen started having American flags on their cameras, and it occurred to me that really the story that the press was wanting to present was only going to be a super patriotic, one-dimensional story. So to me, this is a kind of big brother, you know, big media picture. Lots of times photojournalists are placed in these choreographed situations, right? These choreographed events. And some things can happen for sure that aren't planned, and you look for these moments that are kind of off script. But, you know, something like this, it's an event created by the state for people to report on and to photograph. And so do we just translate that event, or do we try and find a way to maybe find a different meaning, or even subvert the intent of the event?
Let's take a look at some of these other photos that you have in here.
So this picture was taken actually like right down there, but 13 years ago. And so this was at the beginning of the Iraq War, and there were massive demonstrations all around the world to try and prevent that war, but there were also people that were really supportive of it, and they gathered in Times Square. And I was particularly interested in this group of young people who turned out to be Columbia University law students, which is what this guy is. And they were screaming, you know, to bomb Baghdad. And so, one, I was interested that he was a lawyer screaming for war, where in my mind, kind of lawyers are there to sort of prevent violence, right, to sort of negotiate peaceful settlements. But then I was interested in just, you know, this, how do you photograph a scream? You know, how do you photograph sound? And so I used his sort of passion for this war, and sort of connected it to this blowing American flag.
Yeah, and what's going on here?
It's a federal government drill. For me, it's not just that these are interesting to shoot, but also, you know, I think we're all often trying to figure out is, you know, should we be concerned about terrorism, or are we being manipulated and played to be fearful so that we will agree to X, Y, and Z, whatever that is, and normally some loss of civil rights. And so I'm being a New Yorker and also very aware that, you know, the Twin Towers were destroyed, kind of how do I negotiate that myself?
Your approach to photojournalism is different from others. Like, how is that? What's your unique brand of photojournalism, as you would say?
I'm looking more to creating a body of work that's somehow suggestive or interpretive of whatever the political conditions are that I'm working in.
Like the Homeland series that you're talking
like
about.
this one. So like this one,
Here's a bomber going over people hanging out on the beach.
Yeah, so I found a spot that, you know, in Atlantic City is kind of interesting because it's pretty much a bankrupt city. So if you look at the picture on the billboard, no one wants to advertise there, and it's falling apart. And but then you have this $2 billion, you know, weapon system in the sky, which sort of looks like a kite, right? So I like the ambiguity of it as well. You know, it's not like I'm anti-military, but I do feel that it's an institution that has somehow escaped the eyes of photojournalists and of journalists in general, is that it seems like it's an institution that no one wants to critique.
Right.
And I mean, that's what journalists are supposed to do, whether they're using cameras or, you know, words, is in some ways are out there to witness what's happening and also to hold power accountable in some ways.
Well, this has been fun. I really appreciate you coming by. Thank you again, and
Thanks
I really appreciate
a lot.
it.
Appreciate you taking the time. Thank you.
Brooklyn-based documentary photographer Ruddy Roy was named Time Magazine's #1 Instagram photographer of 2016. He also stopped by our New York studio where we talked about intentionality, community, and brotherhood. Let's take a look. Rudy.
We're here.
Thank you so much for joining us. You're an amazing photographer. Tell us a little bit about yourself. What kind of photographer and what kind of person are you?
What kind of person am I? It's for me, it's easy to take pictures to talk about myself. But I knew what poverty was. I knew what an empty cupboard was. I mean, I had a mom who grilled into me the importance of education. And I remember telling her that, you know, I needed to go work. And I went to work for a small newspaper, the Western Mirror at the time, for $219.17, which came out to about $10. But I was in love. I mean, that bug hit me immediately. It wasn't something natural for me to go out each day to see stories and to talk about these stories in a way that would include other people. That is also very important.
I really love typically just looking at the photos. Your feed, it's one of the ones where I read and I'm hanging on every word because it's just really, really interesting. Like, you can really tell like your desire to tell a person's story.
The gap between me and you, black and white, pink, purple, whatever it is the fact that we have little knowledge about each other. And so my job is not to build the bridge. The bridges have been built. My job is to walk across the bridge, to use the bridge. And so words do that. Like, I find this guy in the street, his name is Ruddy Roy. Who is he? He's a father. He's a person who he worked for 30 years at a mill, and the mill closed down, and he lost his job, and he got hooked on drugs. But as I tell this story, I want to humanize this person. That this person didn't just fall out of a cloud and became homeless, or didn't fall out of a cloud and found poverty. That there's a process, and that we all are subjected to process.
I would love to look at some of your photos and hear some of these stories that you have about some of these individuals.
Joseph is somebody I met in the Roger Williams project. I remember looking out when I went to the project for the person that had the most stature. And you could tell immediately that Joseph was a boss, for lack of a better word. And I remember walking over to him and telling him that I was here to photograph the forgotten people. A la Harry Belafonte said the only reason that the United States took so long to go to the South was because the people in the South are the forgotten people. And so when I said this to him, he immediately found some sense of camaraderie between the story I was trying to tell and him feeling like a forgotten person. And so I remember shooting Polaroids. It was 4x5 Polaroids. They were $20 a shot.
Right.
And we went through 4 negatives of him posing like a gangster. And it just didn't feel like the image I wanted. And just before I came out from under the dark cloth, he said, one more. And in my mind, I'm thinking, ooh, this is now $100.
Yeah.
But then he did that. And when I looked behind him, I saw that the seam in the wall was immediately symmetrical, going all the way down to his zipper. But it also created this idea that there was a noose.
Yeah.
Right.
Angled aside.
I wanted to allude to the fact that slavery started here and the fact that these guys did not have jobs, maybe through the institution of racism, through Jim Crow. I wanted to put all of this into one image. We were also in Alabama at a place called The Bottom. I was photographing along the side of the road, and he walked up to me holding this sawed-off shotgun, and I wanted to photograph it. I wanted an image like this. And I remember going back to the hotel. I was really proud of the image. I was using the sodium to wash the image, and the emulsion started to drip. I remember screaming in the hotel and grabbing the image down and going to another pipe and washing it. And I called a friend of mine, and he said, maybe there's rust in the water. And I came back, scanned the image, and this is what I got. And I was so proud of the image because sometimes mistakes do work. And here's one of the situations where it looked like he's speckled by buckshots. One of the things I also discovered is a disconnect between generations. I remember a kid at Morehouse telling me that there's nothing his generation wants from my generation. And I was 27 years older than him. But he already recognized that there's a gulf between us. This image reminds me of that gulf, that this man brought with him his inspiration, Malcolm X. When I spoke to him, he was saying that there was nobody like Malcolm X now that he could look to. So he brought him to Mike Brown's, the space where Mike Brown was killed.
These are all really powerful photos. Thank you for sharing that with us, and thank you for sharing your approach. Hey everybody, we're here with Lisa Kristine, humanitarian photographer and changemaker. And we're gonna be talking about how she uses photography to change the world. Hey Lisa, how you doing?
I'm good, thank you.
Good to have you on the set. I'm a big fan of your work. One of the things that I love about your approach and what you stand for, at least what I believe you stand for, is the intention of using photography to change the world.
Photography to me is a way to find my place in life, you know. It's a way to learn. And at one point, I started to see how it could really create change. And of course, I noticed that by viewers seeing the work and how they were impacted from a visceral standpoint. And I could see the momentum in that because, you know, connecting to the human heart and the human spirit to me is a way to all change and transcendence and everything.
You traveled over 100 different countries, photographing in so many different places. And I feel like there's this connection, and I would love for you to help me understand, like, what is it that you've seen? What connects everything together? What is the thread that binds humanity?
When I go out in the world to make an image, I'm not looking for horror. I'm not looking for something that is dramatic in a negative way. I really seek human beauty, human dignity, and certainly the interlocking, you know, hardship of what it is to be human. So when I work, for example, on the front lines of slavery and I'm photographing people, it doesn't matter how dire or difficult the environment in which they're forced to live. And it's really troubling. I mean, I've seen horrible things, but it's like they all have this dignity. And I actually feel when you talk about momentum and how we can make change with art, to me, it's photographing that dignity, no matter how dire the circumstance, that a viewer can stand in front of it and kind of connect to that. Like, oh my God, this is my brother or sister around the world. And
well, it's interesting because when I look at your work, it reminds me, or this stark contrast between you're going out to some of these places that are very unfortunate. There's things like slavery, but you are capturing that human spirit. This photo, it's like the Slavery to Liberation, Bound to Freedom book, and in this cover, you have this guy who's looking directly at the camera. He's covered in dust and rock, and yet he's just looking straight into your heart, into your soul, and just saying, like, recognize me. I'm a person.
I am here.
And I'm here.
Yeah.
And I think it's wonderful.
These guys actually are, they're miners, and they're forced to go underground. And the only things they have to carry with them are these cheap flickering headlights that they have, the lamps. And they don't, you know, they break all the time. They have an empty sack, which is intended to be filled with stone that contains gold. And they have these like primitive tools. And they go down and they're meant to stay beneath the earth for 72 hours, 48 hours at a time. It's so dark under there. It's dark and it's super wet and it's very hot. And all you hear is this sort of sound of people coughing and the banging of, tools on stone. But when they finally come out of the earth, you'll notice in this image that they are soaking wet. You can see the drying clay from the mine, but their jeans are as though they come out of a swimming pool, but actually it's just the sweat and moisture from the earth.
Right, that is amazing.
Look at him, they're so intense. Like each of these guys just staring into the camera and kind of a guy that's a bit more dreamy and then this direct kind of strength and purposeful gaze. This particular one was made in a brick kiln where like temperatures could be 120, 130 degrees Fahrenheit. And these people will stack these bricks on their heads one at a time, up to 18, and carry them to trucks nearby. They work around a kiln, which is this tall chimney, and the earth beneath is obviously quite heated for about a week, where the bricks turn to this golden color we're used to. But you could see how much hardship is in them. And I love this image because it has like that strata. And these boys I made this at a rescue shelter where kids were being rehabilitated from slavery. But you could see the abuse, from the slaveholders. I believe in this case, they poured hot oil on him. And I mean, he's endured such tragedy,
Yeah, seems like part of what you want to do now is take these photos and spread that out wider and provide that visibility. Like, tell me a little bit more about like the Human Thread Foundation and what is that doing and what does it look like in the future?
It's really about promoting human dignity. It's a foundation under which my exhibitions live, and the exhibition presently that is alive is Enslaved, Bound to Freedom, and the intention is for it to be on multiple continents, about 4 exhibitions a year moving around per continent to really educate people about slavery.
Cool. Thank you very much. And thank you everybody for coming out.